Hi everyone, welcome to FSC Radio. Today we're back with a previous guest, or a guest who's been on previously, which is Scott. Since last time we weren't really finished with all our questions. And yeah, so now we're going to talk about astronomy.
Thanks for having me back. It was a lot of fun last time. I look forward to the questions this time.
Great.
Just tell us about like a day in your life at the university as an astronomer. What's that like?
So a typical day for me, if I'm teaching, would be that I prep for my class. I usually read through my notes, make little corrections to my notes, and then I will spend most of the rest of my day actually in Zoom calls. My day is generally spent calling people around Europe about a big project that I've been working on for the last 12 years, which is WEAVE. And WEAVE is about to be on, in fact, WEAVE is on the telescope, and it's a very exciting time at the moment. But we'll see first light with the telescope at the end of the month, well, through the telescope at the end of the month. And so it's a very interesting, very, very, very busy time at the moment. So my days right now are mostly spent talking to other people about all the things we need to do for WEAVE and to get it ready.
So for non-astronomers, what does WEAVE mean?
So WEAVE is an instrument that takes light from like 1,000 stars or galaxies at the same time, and it collects light from the telescope in fiber optic cables. And so each object, each star or galaxy is fed down a fiber optic cable to a big spectrograph, and the light from those galaxies are spread out so that you can see the individual components of the stars or galaxies. And with this, we can measure the speed of the objects, basically how fast are they moving towards or away from us. And if we have enough signal, we can measure things like the composition of the objects. What are they made of? For stars, for example, what kinds of elements do they have in their atmospheres? For galaxies, we tend to think more of what's the age of the stars that they're made of, or they have lots of gas that's emitting light at various wavelengths. So, yeah, so that's what we're doing.
So how much would you call yourself a scientist or an engineer, like at the moment?
Do you even relate to like engineers at all?
I do. So I spend a lot of time talking to engineers, but I don't think of myself as an engineer.
No, okay.
I think of myself as somebody who manages science and engineers, not an engineer myself. So,
But a scientist?
yeah, I'm a scientist. I'm definitely a scientist because I think in terms of if I'm going to build this instrument, what do I need to build to get the results that I want to get scientifically? And so I always think of, okay, well, what is it that we're trying to learn rather than what are we trying to build? So I think an engineer, and I have a huge amount of respect for engineers, they tend to think of, as I understand it, in all my conversations over the last 10, 12 plus years with engineers, they tend to think of how do I make the best thing I can make for this particular instrument, thing, device, widget, whatever. Scientists tend to think, how can I get the best out of the instrument to get the observations that I want to do the science that I want to do? And my job in WEAVE has largely been to talk to those two groups of people and basically translate back and forth between them. Because they don't quite speak different languages, but sometimes they don't understand each other very well. And so my job is basically to learn enough about the engineering side so I can talk to the scientists about it and talk to the engineers given what the scientists want. Yeah. And so that's really what I've been doing for a long time. I love it, actually. I think I said last time that when I was a kid, I had a telescope and I took it apart and never put it back together again. And so my point of view is always, do I understand how something works? And if I understand how something works, that to me is science, right? Is trying to understand how something works. If I wanted to build things all the time, then I would think of that as engineering.
Yeah. Okay.
But I like working at the interface between them.
So how do you feel about commercial astronomy? Like, for example, SpaceX or something?
well, let's take SpaceX to one side and
Okay.
ask the question, what do I think of commercial spaceflight? In maybe is a better way of saying it.
Or like, this might be something different,
Yeah.
but the idea to colonize Mars.
Yeah, I think those are all slightly different things. I think
Yeah.
colonizing Mars is a very interesting idea. I'm a huge science fiction fan, and I love the idea. I think practically it's very complicated by the fact. I mean, so Mars's biggest problem is that it's not that it's so far away from the sun. Its biggest problem is it has no magnetic field, and so it's not well shielded from cosmic rays, and so it's going to be a very dicey endeavor
And pricey.
and pricey to put people on Mars for an extended length of time. But if Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, I'd be happy to send him, as long as he's not here.
What do you think of the guy? A little off topic. What do you?
We can cut this out. Jeez.
I mean, we don't have to, or we can put it in.
Am I being recorded? I'm being recorded.
This is on record.
I think he's done some good things. I think he's done some very bad things. And I'm an old enough person to, and I come from a certain background and a certain sort of way of thinking about things, that I think that commercial spaceflight for profit is a very dangerous regime to be in, much like the militarization of spaceflight is a very dangerous region to be in. And I fundamentally believe that spaceflight should be limited to peaceful, non-commercial activities. Lots of people disagree with me on this. Elon Musk disagrees with me on this. I think there's also a culture of the sort of people right now who are investing heavily in private spaceflight that does not lend itself well to the advancement of humankind, but rather to the advancement of themselves. And yeah.
But in the process, you do also see advancements in, well, just the technology required for spaceflight. Obviously, it can be used by private companies in, whichever way they want.
Yeah.
But you do see advancements in the field. For example, they had like reusable rockets or rockets that could land them. So like you have less waste, basically, stuff like that. I don't understand.
I think
it
that's a good
properly.
thing, but I don't necessarily agree that has to be done by companies. That could be easily done by companies in collaboration with national governments.
Yeah.
ESA, NASA. There is the fact that ESA and NASA are gigantic, bureaucratic, dinosaur-like environments, and I understand why many people think that commercial vendors who want to do something similar will be more effective, more efficient. But I think it loses sight of the reasons that we do this.
Right.
What should those reasons be then?
Well, I think that there are two reasons to have space flight. Well, actually, maybe three, but at least there are two major reasons for space flight. One is to expand the borders of our understanding of the universe, and as an astronomer, I'm clearly very interested in that part. I think the other one is to give people a challenge and an excitement about the universe. And I think that what has happened in my lifetime, and since I am almost exactly as old as the space program, that what has happened is that while the first of those has continued, the second one has been more difficult. And I think that SpaceX and Blue Origin, I guess, at some level, are giving some excitement back. But the question is, what's the point of what they're doing in the context of what spaceflight might be useful for? I think in the long run, colonizing other planets is an interesting idea, but like I said before with Mars, I think it's going to be very, very, very expensive and very, very challenging. And the question is whether or not that's actually worth the investment. I'm also a strong believer in that there is no planet B, right? And we have to take care of this planet before we decide to trash another one. Well, let's be honest. And so I think that there are some questions about whether we should be investing so heavily in that. But if Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos want to spend all of their money doing that, at some level they should be able to do that, and that's fine. But at the same time, are they actually grasping at a goal that's actually realistic and reasonable? And really, should individuals be trying to save humanity, or should we as a society be trying to save humanity? And I certainly believe the latter, not the former. But that's just me. I think a part of the problem, though, is that, I mean, the public persona of both of those people that I've mentioned they're not very positive, honestly. I think of Elon Musk as a supervillain. And I think that actually Elon Musk himself has been incredibly damaging for astronomy, because Starlink is a huge, huge pain. Starlink contaminates every image that we take, basically, at this point.
Really? How? Sorry, I'm just curious.
So
Starlink's the space satellite for the
it's
Wi-Fi thing.
yeah, it's the constellation of satellites that have been launched.
Yeah.
And already, even though like only a tenth of it has been launched, or maybe even 1% of it has been launched or something, we see Starlink satellite trails in basically every single image we take.
How is he just allowed to send stuff into space? Like, are there...
It is pollution. It is literally
Yeah, is
pollution.
there legislation about that?
Ah, that's very interesting. Space law. So I am not an expert at all. And there's actually a really, really interesting person at Leiden who is a worldwide expert in space law who you should interview.
Oh, okay.
I'll find her name and
Would be awesome.
give
so
it
cool.
to you. But her explanation of this is basically that space law is such that every country regulates its own space launch industry. And they get together, the world gets together to agree on, the various nations get together to agree on how that legislation, should be thought of in the future, and how to tailor it, and so forth. But the organization that does this, which lives under the UN, and I can't remember the name of it right now, it's completely by consensus. So if one country, say Russia or China, decides that they don't want to go along with it, the resolutions don't stick.
Okay.
And so it has to be a big thing that everybody agrees upon is a good idea. And right now, commercial spaceflight is in a gray zone where some don't want to ban it, some do. It's really very complicated. And of course, I have to say that as much as Elon Musk himself frustrates me, SpaceX has been, of all of the launch partners, has been the best in trying to understand the concerns of the astronomical community and try to do something about it. But the best thing they can do for most astronomers is to stop launching. If they're going to continue launching, they have made some improvements in the satellites in terms of their reflectivity. That has helped. But 100 things reflecting 100th as much is still the same as one thing, right? And the problem is already what's up there is bad for us as astronomers. So,
Are there any consequences if they do something that's not allowed? Like,
they can have their launch permits revoked.
okay.
It is possible, but the U.S. government has to agree that they violated somehow. And right now, the U.S. government is fully committed to using, especially SpaceX, but other launch companies as partners in NASA, because NASA depends on commercial companies to actually build anything. So for years and years and years, it was Boeing and Lockheed Martin and blah, 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 blah. And right now it's SpaceX because SpaceX is so much more efficient and therefore much cheaper than the big than Boeing and Lockheed Martin and places like that. So right now there's a lot of money going from NASA into those commercial space flight companies because they're very efficient and very cheap. At least they claim to be very efficient and very cheap. I think there's a lot of money behind the scenes that has been spent, but they're doing well at the moment. So
Yeah, it will also be interesting when if colonizing the planets will be successful, how that will go with laws and stuff.
yeah, I think that it is difficult to imagine that the same problems that we see between countries on Earth won't be replicated elsewhere.
Yeah, given the track record of companies colonizing stuff, it's not going to be a good thing.
Yeah, and
We do live in the Netherlands. I mean, remember
Yes,
the countries?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It's not only companies; it's also countries.
Oh yeah.
But hypothetically, if spaceflight becomes an actuality and you can visit Mars and stuff, and you suppose you have enough like funds to like actually go on it, would you?
Me? Oh, absolutely. No, I've been dreaming about going into space since I was 3, 4, 5 years old.
So in that sense, would you say that? Well, I mean, it's still pretty bad, but like it in that sense, like every other kid who wanted to go to space like you, if space flight becomes a reality, I'm not defending Elon Musk. I don't like him either, but you can.
I think that one has to. I'm old enough again. I keep saying that, but I think that I have enough perspective at this point to realize that my own personal wishes and that my own personal wishes for me and my own personal wishes for society and the world and humanity in general are two different things. And yes, I would give a kidney to go to space, but at the same time, I realize that unless there's a good reason for it, I'm not sure I would. I mean, do you understand the conflict there? And I think for me, it would win out that I wouldn't do it because I would feel like it wasn't the appropriate thing to do as much as I would want to. I think, to be honest, being an astronomer is kind of the right place for me because I can go to mountaintops and I can go look out into space and I can use telescopes to go look into space and I can't stand on Olympus Mons on Mars, but I can imagine it by using my telescope and look at various things, right? And so I think there's some lovely fantasy science fiction elements of actually my real day-to-day job that allows me to picture things that I'll never be able to do. But, I'd love to. I just, I think that there has to be some understanding that I'm not doing something that just breaks everything.
Yeah.
As it is, I own a car that drives on petrol, right? On benzene. And I spent a huge amount of time thinking about whether or not I was going to buy an electric car or not. And the reason I didn't was because it turns out my driving patterns and my family driving patterns are such that an electric car makes no sense for us. The infrastructure for driving the way that we do doesn't exist yet for electric cars. We either drive like once a month and we drive like to IKEA and back or something, or we drive to, the middle of France or the middle of Germany or something. And so we wind up driving like 2,000 kilometers. And the places that we go on vacation are often places where you would never find a charging station.
Yeah.
Just to go back to the astronomy bit, like it does sound like there's a bit of like inherent sadness in being an astronomer. Like you can just look, you can never touch, right?
Yeah, how difficult was it to give up on the childhood
Sorry, I checked
dream?
out for a second. What?
Okay, so let me go. I think maybe I talked about this a little bit last time. I don't quite remember, but I was born crippled. Actually, I was born with clubfoot.
Yeah.
And I was never going to be in a position where I could go into space. I have terrible eyesight. I'm partly crippled, although you wouldn't usually notice it unless you look particularly hard. And so for me, I knew from the time I was thinking about going into space at age 3, 4, or 5, that it would never be a possibility.
Okay.
At least not under the way that things currently work. Even commercial spaceflight, it would be very hard, even if I had all the money in the world, it would be very hard for me to go into space because I think physically it would be very just too challenging, effectively. So I have been resigned, not unhappily, my entire life to thinking about space in a different way. And I don't think it's sad particularly. I think it's slightly, I certainly don't think it's tragic. I just think that, I've managed to steer my desires in a particular way that allows me to get around my physical disabilities that allow me to do what I want to do, but just in a different way. I don't think it's sad.
Yeah.
I don't feel sad about it. Let me put it that way. So.
Can I ask a question that might be sad then? This also might be a little bit morbid, but
Of course.
yeah, you talked about as a scientist, you're curious, you want to understand how. So how do you come to terms with the fact that there's so much we don't understand, and probably in our lifetime we will pass away before we understand?
I don't think
all
that's
these
sad at all.
I think it's
part of the
sad.
excitement.
I think
There's always more to learn.
Oh, sorry.
I agree. There's always more to learn. There's always, from a purely pragmatic point of view.
Yeah.
The complexity of the universe gives me a job, and it lets me stay in my job. If I could solve everything, I wouldn't have a job.
But wouldn't you want to understand everything? Like if you could.
Yeah, I do, but I know that I can't. Right? I mean, it's the same.
Yeah, but how do you come to terms with the fact you can't? This is totally. I'm not not asking this for personal reasons or anything.
Well, for me, myself,
For you,
I think the excitement of learning something new is such that I can live with not knowing everything. And I think actually that knowing everything would be a tremendous burden that would be probably too much, actually. I don't think our brains would be able to handle.
no, they would explode. I think.
Right, and
Yeah.
so I think that the fact that we don't know everything and we keep asking questions about knowing something is truly exciting and truly why you get up in the morning. Was it why I get up in the morning? Well, okay. So I had to get up this morning to teach at 6:30, but I didn't teach at 6:30, but I had to get up at 6:30. But in general, what makes me come to work is answering that question or preparing ways to answer that question, to come to work, to talk to all those people, those engineers, the other scientists about Weave, is to prepare ourselves to answer interesting questions with that instrument. And I think that we're never going to know everything, but we have to be able to ask the next interesting question.
I mean, a counter question to Heidi. Do you think if you knew everything, do you think that would help with your existential dread? Because I doubt it.
No, I don't think that's a solution. But I think for me, well, if this is boring, we can cut it out. But I think I might just have a sense of entitlement towards that. Like I was born, I was put on this planet. I deserve to understand why and whatever. But that's not justified.
Then what?
It's just a feeling. It's just.
Yeah.
Why do you have that feeling?
I think it's because I was raised Christian, so you are raised with an answer, right, which is God, and then, I started to become. I was like, okay, religion is not for me, and then you lose the answer to the question, and you're left with a big hole.
Yeah, I mean that's a question that like humanity's been trying to solve forever. That's why religion exists in the first place. But even if you did know everything, then wouldn't it just be kind of boring?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think,
and also just like it's it feels like an impossible concept to know everything. It's like infinity. You can't wrap your head around it. Knowing everything, I can't even wrap my head around.
But it's cool
So-
that we still know how to work with it sometimes. I mean, you know,
some
we take
people do, some
limits.
people don't.
So I think the problem with knowing everything or thinking that you know everything or thinking that you know an answer is, thinking that there is an answer and that at least you have a direct line to the answer is it leads to being incurious, right? It leads to a lack of curiosity. And I honestly believe that curiosity is the fundamental thing that actually makes human society work. I
Yeah.
think lots of people don't agree with me on that, but I fundamentally believe that the only reason we really do anything is because we're curious.
Yeah.
We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to reproduce, but everything is driven by curiosity, even those things.
Yeah.
Why do you go to restaurants for cultures, for cuisines that you've never had before? You're curious. Why do you want to go travel at all? You're curious. I mean, anybody at this university is here because they're curious, I would think, I would hope. Because honestly,
Yeah.
incurious people are among the least interesting people I've ever met.
Yeah, and also when it comes to social aspects, curiosity is important, I think, because wanting to understand other people is a big part.
Does that help your? Does that help
I
you,
mean,
Heidi?
honestly, it sounds like such a big deal, but like I don't.
No, I mean, it's
I
a
don't
good
know.
question. It's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that it's a good question. I think that for me, curiosity is what drives me fundamentally. What's around that corner? What can I learn?
Did anything ever happen where your curiosity was kind of, I don't know, worn out or?
Well, I don't know. There's the academic system rewards ideas, but it doesn't always reward curiosity.
That's definitely true.
And I think that's a problem with academia. I think that's actually one of academia's biggest problems, to be honest. And sometimes in academia, I feel like being curious is just seen as being
Annoying sometimes.
Yeah, a bit. And I think that there is definitely a feeling that so for me personally, when I was a student, and even when I was a young professor, I was a complete perfectionist. I needed to know the last digit of every calculation, I need to solve every single problem I came across. And I realized that it came down to I was going to solve those problems, but I was never going to actually produce anything because you get so caught up in solving the problem, you don't realize you need to communicate the answer to other people. And I wound up having to realize that I can't solve everything and I can't be a perfectionist. And while this isn't exactly curiosity, my perfectionism is driven a lot by curiosity personally. And I had to give up on being a perfectionist in order to actually be productive enough to survive as an academic. But I don't feel that it was, I look back and I don't feel that it was a great choice because I feel like I've lost some of that now. And now that I'm completely stable as an academic, I feel like I've lost some of my curiosity-driven perfectionism, and that actually, yeah, that's not so nice. I think that's my one big regret in my career is that I feel like it's not that I'm less curious, it's that I'm less perfectionist, and because I'm less of a perfectionist, I can't always accomplish the things I want to accomplish. On the other hand, I do actually produce things. I write papers.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think that's very relatable because I have the same thing where sometimes you study for a test and not like you
Yeah.
need to get a good grade, and then that gets into the way of actually trying to understand it.
Yeah, it's like
Sometimes.
an economic approach to studying.
Yeah, sometimes you only study to get a good grade and not to really understand.
Yeah, as a teacher, I can tell you that
Yeah.
is always that's always the challenge,
Yeah,
right?
it
And
definitely
so,
is.
if we can take a real tangent for a second,
Yeah, sure.
I have a philosophy about teaching, which you've experienced, Heidi, because you've actually been in my class, that I have come after 20 years of being a teacher, and slightly earlier, maybe 18 years after of being a teacher. I don't believe exams are actually a useful method of assessment at all. I would prefer just to give up tests and exams entirely. Why? Because exactly the reason that you just said. Students study for the test, they study for the grade, they don't study to learn. I'm completely uninterested in having students regurgitate what I said to them during class. I want them to think about what, and it turns out that asking students to think on an exam in a 3-hour or now a 2-hour, given that we've just been shortened to 2-hour exams, under pressure with 50 or 100 other students surrounding them in that horrible Aletta Jacobs Hall rooms. It's a recipe for not thinking at all. Yeah. It's a recipe for regurgitation. And that's not what we should be teaching students. We should be teaching students how to use the information to be creative with it, to be curious about it, to learn something from it that they themselves thought of. And the only way I can think of doing that is to make projects the central component of any course. Because otherwise, what's the point? I mean, I don't need you to regurgitate what I taught you. I think assignments are interesting, and I use assignments a lot because I think assignments give a chance to think about the material in ways that's creative and constructive. But I don't think that, I think maybe math up to a certain level, and maybe very basic physics, very basic chemistry, organic chemistry, a few other things. Having tests and regurgitating information is important only in the sense that you have to be able to have that information at your fingertips. Yeah. But you get past a certain point in any discipline, math, physics, chemistry, astronomy, you have to be able to be clever, not even clever. You have to be able to be curious enough about what the answer is that you want to find the answer, not just because somebody told you you needed to do it. Because what are we teaching students for otherwise? We're teaching them to be critical thinkers. We're certainly not teaching them to be critical thinkers in 2-hour lecture, in a 2-hour exam in the Aletta Jacobs Hall, those horrible rooms, those terrible chairs and the terrible desks.
That orange color, it will haunt me in my dreams.
Yes, and so that's my feeling. I mean, that's my teaching assessment philosophy is that please just give students projects because it's the only way they actually get creative and curious about what they're doing.
If you don't if you're not a believer of tests, how do you for the lack of a better word, judge students as if a student wants to come work for you, and I don't know, I guess generally you would want to see their grades. And if you're against tests, how do you?
I actually don't look at grades. Honestly, when students come to work for me as a bachelor's or a master's student, I tend to know them already. We have a small enough institute. Mm-hmm. I know them already. And if I don't know them, then I'll basically interview them in my office, and I'll see what they know.
Everybody gets an interview?
Anybody who wants to come work for me, sure.
But what if there's a lot of applicants?
And I never get more than 4 or 6 people at a time.
Are you interested, Dhruv?
So, no, I mean...
Not asking for a friend.
Okay, right.
So in that case, for bachelor and master students, I would always just interview them and see what they knew and what they were interested in. Try and find a project that was interesting to them that I knew something about. And if I don't know anything about a project that's interesting for them, I don't know why they came to me in the first place. If their grades are terrible, I probably know that already, because at least in astronomy, I've had all the first year students come through me, and that has been true for the last decade. So I have seen every first year astronomy student for the last decade, so I know who they are. Now, there have been a lot more of them in the last couple of years, but I still know them by name. I may not always be able to put a face to a name. It took me a while to actually connect Heidi's face to her name, but I knew who Heidi was before she invited me.
Before Heidi knew who she was.
Before I knew who I was.
So I think that I don't find grades particularly interesting. If you don't make it through the BSA, that's your problem. But and I'll see you afterwards, right? I'll see you after your BSA if you're coming to me for a project. So you've already made it that far. So I don't find grades to be particularly useful. In particular, okay, this is not to insult our Dutch friends at the table, but the zestjes
Cultuur,
culture in the Netherlands, the only getting a 6 or a 6.5.
What's that?
It's like you don't have to put any effort in; you just have to pass the course.
Oh,
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a
I
very
feel attacked.
it's a very strong it's a very strong cultural thing that's taught actually effectively.
Really? Is that really a Dutch thing?
Yeah, it's very much a
Oh,
Dutch thing.
okay.
It's I have not seen it from other. I've not really seen it from other places.
Yeah, okay.
In America, and especially in America, but also in the UK, and I think in India as well, there's an extraordinarily strong culture of be the best.
Yeah,
Be
okay.
that's
the
not here.
best. In the Netherlands and Australia are the two places I know which have what's called a tall poppy culture,
Yeah.
where you just basically anybody who sticks out above the rest, you just cut their heads off, right?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
And
Yeah,
so there's
That's
this,
true.
you're driven to a culture where, an academic culture, where only mediocrity is valued. Now, that's not true at a university, but the problem is that at a university, what has happened is all the people whose heads were cut off and who survived that process wound up at a university. But we have no control at the university over what happens at VVO or even basisschool. And so, okay, I have a child who's gone through this whole process, so I
Yeah.
know the process very well. And even though she has American parents, she has zestius culture in her head. She does. She needs to pass the course. She's more interested in passing the course sometimes than she is in what in. I wouldn't say that that's. I would not say that that's true now that she's a first-year student at university because she loves her program, and she loves. But there's still courses like organic chemistry, which she has to pass, and she has no interest in.
Yeah.
Microbiology, she's not really interested in. She has to pass it. But, I try and break students of this personally, partly by not caring what grades look like, and partly by the fact that I want my students to be interested. Right? And that's
Yeah.
my goal as a teacher, is to get them interested in the material. And if they're not interested in the material, okay. Maybe they're going to wind up being theorists. But, still, I think that everybody in astronomy should know how observations are taken. Otherwise, why are you an astronomer?
Do you prefer the American culture over the Dutch culture? Because I don't know, I can't speak for America, but at least in India, since there's so many people and everyone wants to get to the top, most people just burn out before they even get to college.
I know, and I think that's a bad thing about the way that Indian academic culture works, and I've seen this a lot,
Yeah.
and I think I've only had one Indian PhD student, and it was very clear that when he got to me, he had actually burned out already, but his grades were so good and his references were so good that it wasn't obvious that he had burned out already.
Yeah.
And it took 2 years to realize that he had already burned out by the time that he had gotten here. And it took a lot of reconstruction to get him back on track. And I don't think I ever got him back on track. I think he only got back on track later. And so I think, compared to the American system, I think the American system is a bit different in the sense that there are lots of people and there are fewer places. But the competition, I don't know. I won the competition. It's hard for me to. It's hard for me to say. Well, at some level, I didn't get into Harvard or Princeton, but I got into a lot of really good universities.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's also in the U.S. It's very, very class and financially. It's very much tied to your class, what your parents' finances are, where you live, what school you went to, and in some ways I prefer the Dutch system because a lot of that, the hierarchy in the Netherlands is much flatter. It's a lot flatter than the U.S.
Yeah, I don't know about the US.
It still exists here.
Yeah.
Would you say it's gotten better over the past 20 years? I mean, you just said that.
I do think it's gotten better. I think that.
Do you think it's got worse in any regard? Like the school system, for example, they changed from the test to where the teachers also have a say.
Yeah, but I think the school system has gotten worse, but I don't think that that's the basic reason. I think that the basic reason. Let me put it a different way. I think the school system has actually gotten slightly better in certain ways, but the students that have been produced are not as good. And I'm sorry, I'm probably insulting the people at this table, but
how does that work?
On average, the students that we get now are not as strong as the students we got 20 years ago. And why is that? Because the emphasis on what is being taught at secondary schools at VWO level is different today than it was 20 years ago. Is that better or worse? Now, from the point of view of a department of astronomy or a department of physics that wants to take in students at a certain level, we have found that we've had to fill in a lot more background information, like math in particular.
Yeah, there's remedial calculus courses.
Which never existed when I first got here. If you couldn't pass a calculus course in your first year, you shouldn't be here at all, was the idea. I think, however, what's happened is that even though the level of understanding has gone down, the level of background information has gone down, I don't think the students have gotten dumber. I think what's happened is that they're coming with less information and we have to do more of the work. And I think the problem with that is it's harder on the students because they wind up having to learn more at university than they used to. So they can't achieve as much at the end of 3 or 5 years as they used to be able to. I don't think that means they're any dumber. I just think it means that the training beforehand. And a lot of this has to do with changes to, in particular, the secondary schools, the VWO, over the years by the government, how they've changed things. And in particular, I would place the blame at some level on how secondary school teachers have been hired and paid over the many years. In the old days, this is when I first got here 20 years ago, many secondary school teachers actually had PhDs. Now they have a PAVO degree, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
It's basically teacher training. You can get it basically a year or 2 years of training after your bachelor's.
Oh. But I mean, don't you think a PhD is overkill for an elementary school teacher, you said?
Not for an elementary school teacher. I meant for a secondary school.
A
high
secondary
school
school.
High school teacher.
I thought you said elementary. I was like,
But I think I think the difference. No, for an elementary school teacher, you need people who are specialized in dealing with small children. I'm sorry, but at a high school physics teacher who has a PhD and a high school physics teacher,
my math teacher had a PhD.
Who doesn't? I think there's a big difference in the quality of education that you get from those people. I'm not saying necessarily one is actually really better than the other, but the level of the education is going to be really quite different. So,
but I mean, still, wouldn't you think that a PhD is still overkill considering how high school teachers are compensated? I don't know how well
I think
they're
that's
paid.
the problem. I think it's the compensation. I think they should be paid more. I think all teachers should be paid more. Not me. I'm paid. Believe it or not, I'm actually paid enough. I'm quite happy with my salary.
Do you think like going into the academic route is rewarding in that sense? Do you think you can
financially?
Make yeah. Do you think you can? I mean, you're obviously in a good position in your career now, but like,
I was roughly 50 years old before I felt stable financially.
Oh, jeez.
I'm now 53. Well, I'm actually 52. I'll be 53 in a month. So the answer is I've really only felt financially stably since about 2019 or 20 or so. And I also have a spouse who works 80% or 90% time at the hospital. And together, we feel financially stable. But we certainly didn't feel that way 20 years ago when we got here, and we certainly didn't feel that way 10 years ago before my wife started working, because my wife didn't work for 10 years. We lived carefully for the first 10 years. that we lived here, not super carefully, but carefully enough. And my dad, who was an academic, you know, it was the same thing with him. The first 10 years he was an academic, even slightly more, it was very careful what you spent your money on. So do I feel financially secure now? Yeah. And that's why I don't need to be paid much more than I currently am. I'm quite happy with my current. Don't let any, you know, maybe the faculty board shouldn't hear this, but no, I'm fairly happy with where I am financially, but it helps that my wife works and we only have one kid, and so that helps. But no, the reward
It's not in the financial.
The reward for being an academic is not financial. You want to be an academic, you need to find another reward. Something else needs to be rewarding for you.
The curiosity, right?
Curiosity, exactly.
Okay,
the adulation of students. I don't know, whatever it is that makes you
paid
happy.
in curiosity.
It shouldn't be money.
Yeah, because you're not going to get it. And it's far worse if you're a high school teacher.
Except if
right?
you're Elon Musk. Then maybe.
But he's not a teacher. He's not a professor.
No, and
He doesn't even have a PhD.
he might not even be a scientist.
He doesn't even have a bachelor's degree. The
Wait,
man
he
walked
doesn't?
out of his course. No, he doesn't. He left his course after 7 days.
Wow.
I thought
Okay,
he had
we
a
laugh at
physics
him,
degree
but
from
still.
UPenn.
he's-
Oh,
That's what
maybe
Google
maybe
says
he
at least.
eventually got one, but he went to Caltech and he walked out after 7 days.
I mean, if he got into Caltech, that's still a brag. I'd give it to him. But I don't like him. I don't like him either, but Caltech's respectable.
Respectable.
Dhruv, stamp of approval. Okay, should we wrap
Yeah,
this
let's
up?
go.
Maybe one more fun question.
Yeah, aliens, yes or no?
Of course.
In
There's
our galaxy.
In our galaxy, probably.
Really?
But it depends on what you call an alien.
Just anything. Anything that lives.
okay, no,
Anything?
Well,
a
not-
rock?
Not a rock,
An
obviously.
intelligent life form. Another intelligent life form.
Another intelligent life form.
Not unicellular.
Yeah,
like, not a basic-
almost certainly. One that has space flight and can communicate with us. I doubt it.
One
somehow,
that can
but-
communicate with other aliens of its kind.
Oh, certainly. I mean, you know, are there other Earth-like civilizations out there at our current level? You know, I don't know. You have to look at the Drake equation, but the answer is
What
the chances are non-zero. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Also, is there any merit to Drake's equation? Because it looks kind of goofy. Like it's just like a product of like.
I think that you
I
have
mean,
to
it
live
makes
with
sense,
you have to
but,
live
like-
with the assumptions behind it. But I think it's quite sensible. I mean, Frank Drake was one of my professors in graduate school, so I believe that under the assumptions that Frank wrote down the Drake equation at the time, I think they're quite reasonable assumptions, and I don't think that many of those assumptions have changed radically
Yeah.
in the last 50 years. But I also believe that our understanding of what life is has changed dramatically in the last 50 years. We understand so much more that there are kinds of life that are different than us, or even than the sort of lineage that we have.
Wait, what do you mean exactly? Can you elaborate?
Well, I basically I'm thinking of extremophiles on Earth, for example, bacteria that live by deep sea vents that live off of sulfur, for example, things like that, things that live at temperatures that like the water is basically boiling.
Yeah.
So
Didn't they also take like bacteria out in space and then back, and they survived? Like they were fine.
well, like
water
tardigrades, for example.
Yeah.
So yeah, although tardigrades, I'm not sure. Are they bacteria?
I don't know.
I'm never sure.
I don't
about
know.
They're
tardigrades.
living.
So yeah.
They're living, so they're bacteria.
I mean, they're living. I mean,
Yeah,
you know.
okay.
They would count as aliens if we were just like
Yeah, just leave them out there.
put a fishnet in space,
Let them
swiped
do their
it,
thing.
saw what was there. Oh, it's a living thing.
Favorite Uranus joke?
Oh my god. Okay, this is definitely the last question. Okay.
That was Heidi's question.
No, it was your question.
I don't have a favorite Uranus joke.
Oh,
Sorry.
Do you have
sorry,
one, Dhruv?
Heidi. No, I don't.
Oh, coward.
I was hoping to walk away with one.
Well,
Okay, wait. Let's not end on that one.
No.
Oh, maybe this one. Who's your favorite astronomer or scientist of all time?
Ooh.
Science goat.
My favorite astronomer is a woman named Cecilia Payne, or Cecilia Payne Kopashkin, after she got married. Cecilia Payne was the woman who realized that hydrogen was the most prevalent element in the universe. And she did that by studying the spectrum of the sun. The spectrum of the sun has strong hydrogen lines in it, but most of the lines in the sun come from things like iron and magnesium and things like and calcium and things like that. And it was thought before she started her PhD that the ratio of iron to hydrogen was such that basically there was basically as much iron as there was hydrogen in the sun. The problem with that is it's actually really hard to make a sun. Of course, back in those days, we actually didn't know what powered the sun, so that was part of the problem. But Cecilia Payne, in her PhD thesis, wrote down the equations of how lines form in the sun's atmosphere or any star's atmosphere, and discovered that basically there had to be 12 orders of magnitude more hydrogen than iron or anything else in the sun. Well, that's not quite true. It's actually only 2 orders of magnitude, but it depends on how you count a little bit. But anyway, the point is that at least 70 to 80% of the sun has to be made out of, in her calculation, had to be made out of hydrogen. And this was such a radical idea that actually her PhD supervisor didn't want to actually put her PhD through because he thought that, one, it was wrong, and two, that nobody would believe it. And yet she was absolutely positively correct. And I think that Cecilia Payne might be the most important astronomer ever to live because she proved that the universe was radically different than anybody else thought it was. So for me, that's my hero. I've always had there's somebody else as well, but she's I think the most important one because I think she changed the way we thought not only about astronomy but about the universe. And I think what she taught us about the sun just changed the way we thought. And I think that to me that's amazing. And she was literally like 22 years old, and she was British, and she only could get into Harvard where she did her PhD because the director of the observatory went out of his way to make sure she could be a student there. She was the first ever female student at Harvard. The first one to ever get a PhD. So for me, that's she's heroic on that level, but she's also heroic because she did something nobody else had done. Lots of people thought was wrong at the time. So I think she's amazing. And I've had multiple computers named after her over the years. So.
Man, imagine having the courage to say, no, I think this is right, when everyone around you is like, you probably made some calculation mistake here.
Yeah, I mean, Rosalind Franklin is another one. I mean, Rosalind Franklin's big issue was that, honestly, it's very clear from the historical record that Crick and Watson basically stole her research, and that they put it forward, and maybe it wouldn't have been accepted if she had put it forward. She was also a slightly odd person, it turns out, but at the same time, she was very aware that this would happen if she put it out there, that somebody would take her research, and then they just basically went out of their way to steal her research effectively. And I still don't, to this day, understand why Crick and Watson are held up as being such, important people. Because I think that, it's fairly clear that Rosalind Franklin knew what she had seen and knew what the implications were. So she just didn't get to write the paper first because they took her research and wrote it up. So I don't think I'm not sure she's a hero particularly, although I think she's incredibly important. But But I think that, it was tough. It's still tough to be a woman in science. And, I do everything I can to make sure that women in science are treated better personally. I go out of my way. I sit on panels. I went to The Hague 2 weeks ago to try and help NWO to think up better ways of helping women in science. Because I think it's completely unfair that 50% of the population is still discriminated against.
Yeah, it's also not very efficient, I would say.
I think it's terribly inefficient.
Yeah.
Why would you lose half of your brain power?
Yeah, it doesn't.
And it's worse because, of course, it's still, here I am, white male, talking about this, but science is still dominated by white men. Yeah. And we're a small fraction of the population at this point.
I mean, you're the only one in the room, so I guess that's making a difference.
Yay!
Yes!
There's only 2 men in this room.
Yes, but that's even better. I'm happy that there are only 2 men in this room. This is correct, right? This is the way.
Yeah.
It shouldn't.
This is the perfect ratio.
Well, I don't know if it's perfect. It's. We really should be. I know we shouldn't be focused on this, but there are lots of people in the world who don't get a chance to be good scientists, and they have every ability to do so.
Yeah.
And we should be going out of our way to make sure that they get the chance. So.
Well, I think you are our favorite astronomer. Thanks again for talking to us.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Yeah. I think we all really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah,
It was kind of all over the place, but it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Never a bad episode.
Well, okay, well,
Yes.
thanks for
On that
listening. On that note, thanks for listening, and
See you next time.
bye.
Bye-bye.